The next day, the games continued, but I was not there. It was announced that I was ill. I missed one of the most spectacular contests ever witnessed in the amphitheater between an Indian elephant, they are much bigger than the African breed, and a rhinoceros. Experts betted on the rhinoceros, for although it was by far the smaller animal, its hide was much thicker than the elephant's, and it was expected to make short work of the elephant with its long, sharp horn. In Africa, they were saying elephants had learned to avoid the hunts of the rhinoceros, which holds undisputed sway in its own territory. This Indian elephant, however, as Posthumus described the fight to me afterwards, showed no anxiety or fear when the rhinoceros came charging into the arena, meeting him each time with his tusks and lumbering after him with clumsy speed, when he retired, discomfited. But finding himself unable to penetrate the thick armor of the beast's neck as he charged, this fantastic creature had recourse to cunning. He picked up with his trunk a rough broom made of a thorn bush, which a sweeper had left on the sand, and darted it in the enemy's face the next time he charged. He succeeded in blinding first one eye, then the other. The rhinoceros, distracted with rage and pain, dashed here and there in pursuit of the elephant, and finally ran full tilt against the wooden barrier, going right through it, and shattering his horn and stunning himself on the marble barrier behind. Then up came the elephant with his mouth open, as if he were laughing, and first enlarging the breach in the wooden barrier, began trampling on his fallen enemy's skull, which he crushed in. He then nodded his head, as if in time to music, and presently walked away. His Indian driver came running out with a huge bowl full of sweetmeats, which the elephant poured into his mouth, while the audience roared applause. Then the beast helped the driver up on his neck, offering his trunk as a ladder, and trotted over to Augustus, where he trumpeted the royal salute, which these elephants are taught only to utter for monarchs, and knelt in homage. But as I say, I missed this performance. That evening, Livia wrote to Augustus. My dear Augustus, Claudius's unmanly behavior yesterday in fainting at the sight of two men fighting, to say nothing of the grotesque twitching of his hands and head, which at a solemn festival, in commemoration of his father's victories, were all the more shameful and unfortunate, has at least had this advantage, that he can now definitely decide once and for all that, except in the dignity of priests, for the vacancies in the colleges must be filled somehow, and Plautius has managed to coach him well enough in his duties. Claudius is perfectly unfit to appear in public. We must be content to write him off as a loss, except perhaps for breeding purposes, for I hear he has now done his duty by Urgulanilla. But I shan't be sure of that until I see the child, which may well be a monster like him. Antonia has today abstracted from the study what appears to be a notebook of historical material, which he has been collecting for a life of his father. With it she found a painfully composed introduction to the projected work, which I send you herewith. You will observe that Claudius has singled out for praise his dear father's one intellectual foible, that willful blindness to the march of time, the absurd delusion that the political forms that suited Rome when Rome was a small town at war with neighboring small towns could be re-established after Rome had become the greatest kingdom known since the days of Alexander. Look what happened when Alexander died, and nobody could be found strong enough to succeed him as supreme monarch. Why, the empire simply fell to pieces. But I should not waste my time and yours in making historical platitudes. Athenodorus and Sulpicius, with whom I have just had a conference, say that they had not seen this introduction until I showed it them and agreed on its extreme inadvisability. They swear that they have never put any subversive ideas into his head, and suggest that he must have got them from old books. Personally, I think that he inherited them. His grandfather had the same curious infirmity, you remember. And it is just like Claudius to have chosen that one weakness to inherit, and to have refused any legacy of physical or moral soundness. Thank God for Tiberius and Germanicus. There's no Republican nonsense about them so far as I know. Naturally, I am instructing Claudius that he must desist from his biographical labors, saying that if he disgraces his father's memory by fainting at the solemn games given in his honor, he is obviously unfit to write his life. Let him find some other employment for his pen. Livia. Ever since Pollio had told me about the poisoning of my father and grandfather, I had been greatly perplexed. I could not make up my mind whether the old man had been talking senile nonsense or joking, or whether he really knew something. Who but Augustus himself was sufficiently interested in the monarchy to have poisoned a nobleman merely because he believed in republican government? Yet I could not believe Augustus the murderer. Poison was a mean way of killing, a slave's way, and Augustus would never have stooped to it. Besides, he was not a hypocrite, and when he talked about my father, it was always with admiration and affection. I consulted 2 or 3 recent histories, but they told me nothing that I had not already heard from Germanicus of the circumstances of my father's death. It was only a couple of days before the games that I happened to be talking to our porter, who had been my father's orderly throughout his campaigns. The honest fellow had been drinking rather too much, because my father's name was on everyone's lips at the time, and his veterans had come in for a good deal of reflected glory. Tell me what you know of my father's death, I said boldly. Were there any stories current in the camp that he met his death other than by accident? He replied, I wouldn't say it to anybody, sir, but yourself, but I can trust you, sir. You're the son of your father, and I never knew a man who didn't trust him. Yes, sir, there was a rumor going about, and there was more in it than in most camp rumors. Your brave and noble father, sir, was poisoned. It's my sure belief. A certain person whose name I won't mention, because you'll know it without my saying, was jealous of your father's victories, and sent him an order of recall. That's not a story or rumor. That's history. The order came when your father had broken his leg. Not much of a damage either, and it was coming along well enough until that doctor fellow arrives from Rome at the same time as the message, with his little bag of poisons in hand. Who sent that doctor fellow? The same person who sent the message. 2 and 2's 4, isn't it, sir? We orderlies wanted to kill that doctor fellow, but he got back safe to Rome under special escort. When I read my grandmother Livia's note telling me to desist from writing my father's life, my perplexity increased. Polio should surely not have meant to point to my grandmother as the murderess of her former husband and her son. It was unthinkable. And what could have been her motive? Yet when I came to consider the matter, I could more easily believe that it was Livia than that it was Augustus. That summer Tiberius needed men for his East German war, and levies were called from Dalmatia, a province that had lately been quiet and docile. But when the contingent assembled, it happened that the tax collector was making his annual visit to those parts, and exacting from the province not more than the sum fixed by Augustus, but more than it could easily pay. There were loud protests of poverty. The tax collector exercised his right of seizing good-looking children from the villages which could not pay and carrying them off to be sold as slaves. The fathers of some of the children thus seized were members of the contingent, and naturally made a great outcry. The entire force revolted, killing their Roman captains. A Bosnian tribe rose in sympathy, and soon the whole of our frontier provinces between Macedonia and the Alps were in a blaze. Fortunately, Tiberius was able to conclude a peace with the Germans at their instance, not his own, and march against the rebels. The Dalmatians would not meet him in a pitched battle, but broke up into small columns and carried on a skillful guerrilla warfare. They were lightly armed and knew the country well, and when winter came even dared to raid Macedonia. Augustus at Rome could not appreciate the difficulties with which Tiberius had contended, and suspected him of purposely delaying operations for some secret private ends, which he could not fathom. He decided to send out Germanicus with an army of his own to spur Tiberius to action. Germanicus, who was now in his 23rd year, had just entered, 5 years before the customary age, on the first city magistracy. The military appointment caused surprise, everyone expecting Postumus to be chosen. Postumus had no magisterial appointment, but was busy on Mars Field training the recruits for this new army. He now bore the rank of regimental commander. He was 3 years younger than Germanicus, but his brother Gaius had been sent to govern Asia at the age of 19, and had become a consul in the year following. Postumus was by no means less capable than Gaius, it was agreed, and, after all, he was Augustus's single surviving grandson. My own feelings on hearing the news, which had not yet been made public, were torn between joy on Germanicus's account and sorrow on Postumus's. I went to find Postumus and arrived at his quarters in the palace at the same time as Germanicus. Posthumus greeted us both affectionately, and congratulated Germanicus on his command. Germanicus said, "It is because of this that I have reputation is nothing to me if I injure you by it. You are as capable a soldier as I am, and as Augustus's heir you should obviously have been chosen. With your consent, I propose to go to him now and offer to resign in your favor. I'll point out the misconstruction that the city will be sure to put on his preference of me to you. It is not too late yet to make the alteration." Posthumus answered, "Dear Germanicus, you are very generous and noble, and for that reason I shall speak frankly. You are right in saying that the city will treat this as a slight on me. The fact that your duties as a magistrate are being interrupted by the appointment while I am perfectly free to be sent aggravates the matter. But believe me, the disappointment that I feel is amply recompensed by this further proof you have given me of your friendship, and I wish you a speedy recovery and every possible success." Then I said, "If you will both forgive me for expressing an opinion, I think that Augustus has considered the situation more carefully than you give him credit for having done. From something I overheard my mother saying this morning, I gather that he suspects my uncle Tiberius of purposely prolonging the war. If he were to send Posthumus out with the new forces, after that old history of misunderstanding between my uncle and Posthumus's brother, my uncle might be suspicious and offended. Posthumus would seem like a spy and a rival. But Germanicus is his adopted son, and would seem to be sent. I don't think that there is more to be said than that Posthumus will get his chance elsewhere, no doubt, and soon enough." They were both very pleased with this new view of the matter, which did credit to them both, and we all parted on the most friendly terms. That same night, or rather in the early hours of the following morning, I was working late in my room on the upper story of the house when I heard distant shouting and presently a slight scuffling noise from the balcony outside. I went to the door and saw a head appear over the top of the balcony, and then an arm. It was a man in military dress who threw his leg over the balcony and pulled himself up. I was paralyzed for the moment, and the first wild thought that came into my head was, "It's an assassin sent by Livia." I was just going to shout for help when he said in a low voice, "Hush! It's all right. I'm Posthumus." "Oh, Posthumus, what a fright you gave me. Why do you come climbing in at this time of night like a burglar? And what's wrong with you? Your face is bleeding and your cloak's torn." "I've come to say goodbye, Claudius. I don't understand. Has Augustus changed his mind? I thought the appointment had already been made public. Give me a drink, I'm thirsty. No, I'm not going to the wars. Far from it. I've been sent fishing." "Don't talk in riddles. Here's the wine. Drink it quick and tell me what's wrong. Where are you going fishing?" "Oh, to some small island. I don't think they've chosen it yet." "You mean—" My heart sank and my head swam. "Yes, I'm being banished, like my poor mother." "But why? What crime have you committed?" "No crime that can be officially mentioned to the Senate. I expect the phrase will be incurable and persistent depravity. You remember that pillow debate? Oh, Posthumus, has my grandmother— Listen carefully, Claudius, for time is short. I am under close arrest. But just now I managed to knock down 2 of my escort and break away. The palace guard has been called out, and every possible way of escape is blocked. They know I'm somewhere in these buildings, and they'll search every room. I felt I had to see you because I want you to know the truth and not believe the charges that they have trumped up against me. And I want you to tell Germanicus everything. Send him my most loving greeting and tell him everything exactly as I tell it you now. I don't care what anybody else thinks of me, but I want Germanicus and you to know the truth and think well of me. I'll not forget a word, Posthumus. Quick, tell me from the beginning. Well, you know that I've been out of favor with Augustus lately. I couldn't make out why at first, but soon it was obvious that Livia was poisoning his mind against me. He is extraordinarily weak where she is concerned. Imagine living with her for nearly 50 years and still believing every word she says. But Livia was not the only one in this plot. Livilla was in it too. Livilla. Oh, I am so sorry. Yes, you know how much I loved her and how much I have suffered on her account. You hinted once, about a year ago, that she wasn't worth my troubling about, and you remember how angry I was with you? I wouldn't talk to you for days. I'm sorry now that I was angry, Claudius. But you know how it is when one is hopelessly in love with someone. I didn't explain to you then that just before she married Castor, she told me that Livia had forced the marriage on her, and that really she loved only me. I believed her. Why shouldn't I have believed her? I hoped that one day something would happen to Castor, and she and I would be free to marry. That's been in my mind day and night ever since. This afternoon, just after seeing you, I was sitting with her and Castor in the grape arbor by the big carp pool. He began taunting me. I realized now that the whole thing had been carefully rehearsed beforehand between them. The first thing he said was, "So Germanicus has been preferred to you, eh?" I told him that I considered it a wise appointment, and that I had just congratulated Germanicus. Then he said, in a jeering way, "So it has your princely approval, has it? By the way, do you still expect to succeed your grandfather as emperor?" I kept my temper, for Livilla's sake, but said that I did not think it decent to discuss the succession while Augustus was still alive and in full possession of his faculties. Then I asked him, ironically, whether he was offering himself as a rival candidate. He said, with an unpleasant smile, "Well, if I did, I expect I would have more chance of success than you. I usually get what I want. I use my brains. I won Livilla by using my brains. It makes me laugh when I think how easily I persuaded Augustus that you weren't a suitable husband for her. Perhaps I'll get other things I want, too, that way. Who knows?" This made me really hot. I asked him whether he meant that he had been telling lies about me. He said, "Why not? I wanted Livilla, and that's how I got her." Then I turned to Livilla and asked her whether she had known about this. She pretended to be indignant and said that she knew nothing about it at all, but that she believed Castor capable of any crooked dealing. She forced out a tear or two and said that Castor was rotten through and through, and that nobody could guess how much she had suffered from him, and that she wished she were dead. Yes, that's an old trick of hers. She can cry whenever it suits her. It makes everyone in. If I told you all that I knew of her, you'd have hated me perhaps for a time, but it would have saved you all this. Then what happened? This evening she sent me a verbal message by her lady-in-waiting that Castor would probably be out. This evening she sent me a verbal message by her lady-in-waiting that Castor would probably be out all night on one of his usual debacles, and that when I saw a light at her window shortly after midnight, I was to come to her. Beneath the light, and I was to climb in quietly. She wanted to tell me something very important. Of course, that could only mean one thing, and it set my heart pounding. I waited in the garden for hours until I saw the light appear for a moment at her window. Then I found the window open below and climbed in. Lavilla's maid was there and guided me upstairs. She showed me how to get into Lavilla's room by climbing across from one balcony to another until I reached her window. This was to avoid the guard posted in the passage near her door. Well, I found Lavilla waiting for me in her dressing gown, with her hair down and looking infernally beautiful. She told me how cruelly Castor had behaved to her. She said that she owed him nothing as a wife, because on his own confession he had married her by fraud, and he had behaved most brutally to her. She flung her arms around me, and I picked her up and carried her over to the bed. I was mad with desire for her. Then suddenly she began to scream and pummel me. I thought for the moment that she had gone mad, and put my hand over her mouth to quiet her. She struggled free, knocking over a little table with a lamp and a glass jar on it. Then she screamed, "Rape! Rape!" And then the door was battered down, and in came the palace guard with torches. Guess who was at their head? Castor! Livia, she brought us just as we were into Augustus's presence. Castor was with them, though Livilla had told me that he was dining at the other side of the city. Augustus dismissed the guard, and Livia, who had hardly said a word until then, began her attack on me. She told him that his suggestion she had gone to my quarters to acquaint me privately with Amelia's charges and asked me what explanation I had to offer. Amelia? Which Amelia? My niece. I didn't know she had anything against you. She hasn't. She was in the plot too. So Livia said that, not finding me in my quarters, she had made inquiries and had been told that the patrol had seen me sitting in the garden under a pear tree on the south side. Sent a soldier to find me, but he came back and said that I wasn't there, but that he had something suspicious to report. A man climbing from one upper balcony to another just above the sundial. She knew whose rooms those were, and was greatly alarmed. By good luck she arrived just in time. She had heard Lavilla's screams for help. I had broken into her bedroom by way of the balcony, and was on the point of raping her. The guards had burst down the door and pulled me away from the terrified and half-naked young woman. She had brought me here at once, and Lavilla as a witness. Telling her story, that whore Lavilla was sobbing and hiding her face. Her dressing gown was ripped across. She must have torn it herself deliberately. Augustus called me a beast and a satyr, and asked me whether I had gone mad. Of course I couldn't deny that I had been in her bedroom, or even that I had been making love to her. I said that I had come by invitation, and tried to explain things from the beginning, but Livilla began screaming, "It's a lie! It's a lie! I was asleep and he came in the window and tried to rape me!" Then Livia said, "And I suppose your niece, Amelia, invited you to assault her too? You seem very popular with the young women." That was clever of Livia. I had to justify myself about Amelia and leave the Livilla story. I told Augustus that I had dined with my sister Julia the night before, and that Amelia was there, and that this was the first time I had seen the girl for 6 months. I asked on what occasion I was supposed to have assaulted her, and Augustus said that I knew very well when it was, after dinner, in the temporary absence of her parents, who were called away by an alarm of thieves, and that I had only been prevented by the return of her parents. The story was so ridiculous that, furious as I was, I could not help laughing. But this increased in Augustus's rage. He was about to rise from his ivory chair and strike me. I said, "I don't understand. Was there really an alarm of thieves?" "Yes, and Amelia and I were left alone for a few minutes, but the conversation was most blameless, and her governess was there. We were discussing fruit trees and garden pests, until Julia and Emilius came back and said that it was a false alarm. Julia and Emilius aren't in Livia's pay, you may be sure. They hate her, so Amelia must have arranged it. I began to think quickly what spite she held against me, but I could remember nothing. Suddenly the explanation occurred to me. Julia had told me as a secret that Amelia was at last getting what she wanted. She was to marry Appius Silanus. You know that young dandy, don't you?" "Yes, but I don't follow." "It's quite..." I said to Livia. "Amelia's reward for this lie is to be married to Silanus, isn't it?" "And what does Livilla get?" "Did you promise to poison her present husband and provide her with a handsomer one?" Once I had mentioned poison, I knew that I was doomed. So I decided to say as much as I could while I had the opportunity. I asked Livia just how she had arranged the poisoning of my father and brothers, and whether she favored slow poisons or quick ones. "Claudius, do you think that she killed them?" "I'm sure of it." "You dared ask her that?" "It's very probable. I think she poisoned my father and my grandfather too," I said, "and I don't suppose they were her only victims, but I have no proof." "Neither have I, but I enjoyed accusing her of it. I shouted at the top of my voice so that half the palace must have heard. Livia hurried from the room and called the guard. I saw Livilla smiling. I made a grab at her throat, but Castor got between us, and she escaped. Then I grappled with Castor and broke his arm, and knocked out 2 of his front teeth on the marble floor. But I did not struggle with the soldiers. It would have been undignified. Besides, they were armed. 2 of them held each of my arms as Augustus thundered abuse and threats at me. He said that I am to be banished for life to the most desolate island in his dominions, and that only his unnatural daughter could have borne him so unnatural a grandson. I told him that in name he was Emperor of the Romans, but that in fact he was less free than the girl-slave of a drunken bodmaster, and that one day his eyes would be opened to the unnatural crimes and deceits of his abominable wife. But meanwhile, I said, my love and loyalty to him remained unchanged. The hue and cry was now sounding through the lower story of our house. Posthumus said, I don't want to compromise you, dear Claudius. I must not be found in your room. If I had a sword, now I'd use it. Better to die fighting than to rot away on an island. Patience, Posthumus. Yield now, and your chance will come later. I promise you it will come. When Germanicus knows the truth, he'll not rest until you're free again, and neither will I. If you get yourself killed, it will only be a cheap triumph for Livia. You and Germanicus can't explain away all that evidence against me. You'd only get yourself into trouble if you tried. The opportunity will come, I say. Livia has had things her own way too long, and she'll grow careless. She's bound to make a slip soon. She wouldn't be human if she didn't. I don't think she is human, Posthumus said. And when Augustus suddenly realized how he has been deceived, don't you think he'll be as merciless towards her as he was towards your mother? She'll poison him first. Germanicus and I will see that she doesn't. We'll warn him. Don't despair, Posthumus. Everything will be all right in the end. I'll write you letters as often as I can and send you books to read. I'm not afraid of Livia. My letters. You'll know that they are being held back. Look carefully at the 7th page of any sewn sheet book that reaches you from me. If I have a private message for you, I'll write in milk there. It's a trick that the Egyptians use. The writing is invisible until you warm it in front of a fire. Oh, listen to those doors banging. You must go now. They're at the end of the next corridor. Tears were in his eyes. He embraced me tenderly, without another word, and walked quickly to the balcony. He climbed over the edge, waved his hand in farewell, and slid down the old vine, up which he had climbed. I heard him running away through the garden, and a moment later, cries and shouts from the ground. I have no recollection at all of anything that happened for the next month or more. I was ill again, so ill that they talked of me as already dead. By the time I had begun to recover, Germanicus was already at the wars, and Posthumus had been disinherited and banished for life. Footnote 7 A.D. End of footnote. The island chosen for him was Planasia. It lay about 12 miles from Elba in the direction of Corsica, and had not been inhabited within human memory. But there were some on it which were converted into living quarters for Posthumus and a barracks for the guard. Planasia was roughly triangular in shape, the longest side being about 5 miles long. It was treeless and rocky, and only visited by the Elba boatmen in the summer when they came to bait lobster pots. By Augustus's orders, this practice was discontinued for fear Posthumus might bribe someone and escape. Tiberius was now Augustus's sole heir, with Germanicus and Castor to carry on the line after him. Livia's line.